All right, so today we're going to dive into divorce in South Africa, and we've got some interesting information laid out here.
Yeah, we do. Really breaks down like all the different ways it can go.
Yeah, and the thing that kind of jumps out right away is that it seems like there's kind of two main paths, right? You can go the unopposed route or you can go the opposed route.
Absolutely. And that's really what we want to clarify in this deep dive. What does that distinction actually mean, especially for someone who might be finding themselves in this situation?
Yeah, so let's start with, I guess, what sounds like the simpler one on the surface, the unopposed divorce. What does that even mean?
Well, it boils down to both spouses agreeing on the big things, how to split everything up, the assets, and if there are kids involved, all those arrangements, custody support all of that.
Okay, so assuming everyone's on the same page, then what does the process actually look like, legally speaking?
So it starts with one person, the plaintiff, issuing a summons. But the key here is that the other person, the defendant, they don't contest it. Because there's already that shared understanding on all the major points, the legal steps can move pretty quickly.
And I see here that, if a couple's aligned on things like, who gets what property, how child support's going to work, it can be wrapped up in a few weeks.
Exactly. And that's, less stress, less cost overall. It just allows for a much smoother transition, for everyone.
Okay, so now the flip side of that is the opposed divorce.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a whole other beast.
Yeah, it definitely can be. So this is when one spouse disagrees with the terms of the divorce.
Right.
It could be anything from, how property gets divided, especially like retirement funds saved during the marriage.
Oh, yeah, those are a big one, I bet.
Huge sticking point, actually. The stats show that. And then, of course, parenting plans for the kids, if any.
Yeah, so how does that disagreement change the legal game then?
Well, when someone objects, they file a notice of intention to defend. That basically tells the court, hey, I'm going to be actively involved in this process. I'm going to fight these terms. And that right there, that really stretches things out. You end up with a lot of back and forth legal paperwork, and it could even go to trial.
And this info here says that fighting over assets or those child arrangements, it can drag on for months, sometimes even years.
It's true, and the downsides are real. The longer it takes, the more strain it puts on everyone emotionally, especially if there are children involved. And then, of course, you have legal fees just piling up, making an already difficult situation even more complex.
So even though these two paths seem so different, are there like any shared steps in both?
Yeah, good point. So whether it's unopposed or opposed, it always starts with that summons, and everything has to follow the rules set out in South Africa's Divorce Act.
Okay, and then I noticed when kids are involved, there's this mention of the family advocate.
Yeah.
What exactly do they do?
Right. So the family advocate is kind of like an independent investigator appointed by the state. They'll look into the family's whole situation, meet with both parents, often the kids too, and then they advise the court on what's truly in the best interests of the child. Things like where they should live, how often they see each parent, that kind of stuff.
Interesting, and something that struck me is that even though opposed divorces can get so messy, dragged out, the system actually seemed to push for couples to try and reach their own agreement. Why is that?
Well, you got to look at the bigger picture, right? When these things go to court, it not only uses up a lot of resources, but it can also make the conflict even worse. And ultimately, that hurts everyone involved. So judges will often really encourage couples to explore options like mediation to try and find a compromise that works for them.
So almost like trying to turn an opposed divorce into an unopposed one.
Exactly. And it's really the best case scenario, if at all possible.
So bottom line is that the real difference comes down to whether there's agreement from the get-go. Unopposed is definitely the smoother, quicker path when everyone's on the same page, whereas opposed divorce, that can turn into a really, really tough journey.
That's a good way to put it. And it's worth emphasizing, based on what we've seen here, that trying your absolute best to find an amicable solution really is the best way to protect everyone, especially the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you're going through this, it's worth thinking about, not just the immediate impact, but those long-term emotional and financial consequences. What kind of resolution sets you up for the future you want? That's something to really consider. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
You got it.
We'll catch you next time.